The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly before the stellar research vessel Dawn Seeker as it drifted through the darkness between the stars. The ship's long-range sensors had picked up something unusual, a massive object floating silently in the void. As they drew closer, the crew's excitement grew with each passing moment. At the heart of the bridge, Captain Hanwoo sat perfectly still, his four eyes never leaving the main display screen. The target of their interest was finally coming into view, a colossal warship of clearly human design. Its dark hull seemed to drink in the light from their scanners, creating an almost ghostly silhouette against the starfield behind it. The bridge crew worked in focused silence, their various appendages moving across control surfaces with practiced efficiency. Chief Scientist Jai-Yun's antennae quivered as she analyzed the incoming data streams, their tips glowing faintly with neural activity. Her inner eyelids flicked rapidly as she processed the information flooding her screens. "Captain," she called out, her voice trembling slightly with barely contained excitement. "Initial scans are complete. The vessel is definitely of human origin. Based on the hull composition and design elements, I estimate it to be approximately 3 centuries old." Hanwoo's mandibles clicked together softly as he considered this information. His species equivalent of a thoughtful frown crossed his features as he studied the massive ship. The humans had been absent from this sector of space for so long that finding any trace of their civilization was remarkable. This discovery could revolutionize their understanding of human technological development, even if it was primitive by their current standards. "What about life support systems?" he asked, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into the standard trade language used by the crew. "Any signs of activity?" Technical Officer Totman's 6-fingered hands danced across his console as he conducted another detailed scan. "Negative, Captain. The ship appears to be completely powered down. We're not detecting any energy signatures, not even residual ones. It's as dead as a space rock." The bridge crew continued their work, each focused on their own tasks. None of them noticed the almost imperceptible flicker that rippled through their own ship's systems. Deep within the computer cores of the Dawn Seeker, something had awakened, something that was now methodically probing their databases, gathering information about its visitors with silent efficiency. "Move us in closer," Hanwoo ordered, leaning forward in his command chair. "I want detailed scans of every section of that hull. The Historical Sciences Division back home will want every piece of data we can gather." As the Dawn Seeker crept closer to the derelict vessel, the true scale of their discovery became apparent. The human warship was massive, easily 3 times the size of their research vessel. Its hull bore the scars of ancient battles, telling silent stories of conflicts long forgotten. "Captain," Jai-Yun called out again, her antennae now straight with confusion. "I'm detecting some unusual patterns in the hull composition. The material, it's like nothing in our database. The age readings are consistent, but the technology level required to create such an alloy." She left the sentence hanging, but Hanwoo understood her implication. Something about this primitive vessel wasn't adding up. Still, he dismissed the concern. After all, humans had been technologically inferior when they vanished from this sector. This was probably just some quirk of their manufacturing process. As the Dawn Seeker's powerful scanning beams swept across the ancient warship's hull, deep within its silent corridors, circuits that hadn't carried power in centuries began to warm. Dormant systems started their boot sequences, and ancient algorithms began to run their first diagnostics in 300 years. The human warship wasn't as dead as it appeared. It was simply waiting, watching, and gathering information about the creatures who had disturbed its long slumber. Soon, very soon, it would show them just how wrong they were about humanity's primitive technology. But for now, it waited, silent and patient, as the aliens continued their scans, blissfully unaware of what they had just awakened. The cold silence of space was broken by the soft hum of engines as 3 more research vessels dropped out of hyperspace, their sleek forms gliding into position around the ancient human warship. The newcomers dwarfed the Dawn Seeker, their sophisticated scanning arrays already probing the derelict vessel with powerful energy beams. Captain Hanwu watched from his bridge as the new ships took up their positions. The collective council had moved with surprising speed after receiving their initial report. Within hours, they had authorized a full salvage operation, treating the massive human warship as nothing more than an interesting relic to be studied and eventually dismantled. The salvage teams worked quickly, setting up their equipment around the hull. Their ship's external lights illuminated the ancient vessel, casting long shadows across its battle-scarred surface. Under the harsh light, the signs of past conflicts became even more apparent. Impact craters, energy weapon scorches, and strange markings that might have once been identification codes. Dr. Minna floated near the hull in her environmental suit, her 4 arms carefully adjusting the settings on a massive plasma cutter. The device was state-of-the-art, capable of slicing through any known material with ease. But something about this hull was different. The cutting beams seemed to scatter and diffuse against the surface, barely leaving a mark. "This is fascinating," she said over the team's communication channel. "The hull material is unlike anything I've encountered before. It's resisting our standard cutting protocols, as if they were nothing more than light beams." Behind her, a team of technicians monitored various pieces of equipment, their environmental suits marked with different colors to indicate their specialties. They had been working for hours, yet had barely managed to scratch the surface of the hull. Salvage Chief Du Hyun drifted over to observe their progress, his irritation evident even through his suit's communication system. "Primitives always over-engineer everything," he said dismissively. "They lack the sophisticated understanding of material efficiency that we possess. They compensate with brute force and excessive reinforcement." The teams continued their work, setting up more cutting equipment at various points along the hull. The space around the ancient warship was now crowded with workers, equipment, and small transport vessels ferrying supplies back and forth. As Dr. Minna activated the plasma cutter again, something strange happened. The beam touched the hull, and suddenly all the equipment in the immediate area experienced a power fluctuation. Lights flickered, tools sputtered, and for a brief moment, even their suit systems seemed to hiccup. "Just feedback from the hull material," Du Hyun said quickly, though there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Adjust the harmonics and continue. We need to get inside this relic before the day cycle ends." Deep within the massive warship, something stirred. Circuits that had laid dormant for centuries began to warm, sending tiny pulses of energy through long silent systems. In hidden compartments and sealed chambers, ancient machinery began to wake, responding to protocols written hundreds of years ago. The salvage teams worked on, unaware of the activity beneath the hull they were trying so hard to breach. More cutting equipment was brought in, each more powerful than the last. The space around the human vessel was now thick with ships, workers, and the constant chatter of teams coordinating their efforts. "Try focusing all cutters on a single point," Dr. Minna suggested, her scientific curiosity now fully engaged. "Perhaps we can overwhelm whatever properties are causing this resistance." As the teams repositioned their equipment, none of them noticed the subtle changes happening around them. Their own ship's systems were experiencing small, almost undetectable glitches. Data streams flickered with strange patterns. Communication signals carried odd harmonics that shouldn't have been there. The ancient warship was gathering information, learning about its visitors through their own attempts to breach its defenses. Every scan they made, every cutting attempt, every communication signal, all of it was being analyzed and processed by systems far more sophisticated than the aliens suspected. A soft humming began to emanate from the hull, but the salvage teams dismissed it as resonance from their cutting equipment. They continued their work, confident in their technological superiority, never suspecting that they were about to learn a harsh lesson about underestimating humanity's capabilities. The day cycle was drawing to a close, and frustration was mounting among the salvage teams. They had brought their best equipment, their most advanced technology, and yet they had barely managed to scratch the surface of what they considered to be a primitive vessel. As the teams prepared for one final attempt to breach the hull, deep within the warship's core, ancient systems completed their warm-up sequences. The time for waiting was almost over. The first sign of trouble struck without warning. In an instant, all 4 research vessels lost their external communications. The cutting teams scattered across the human warships all watched in confusion as their equipment suddenly went dark, the powerful cutting beams dying without so much as a flicker. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. The workers floated in space, their environmental suits now the only things protecting them from the void. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own breathing inside their helmets. Inside the ancient vessel's command center, systems that had been dormant for centuries hummed to life. Displays flickered on one by one, casting an eerie blue glow throughout the bridge. The ship's artificial intelligence, designation UNSS VIJL, finished its analysis of the situation. It had been watching, learning, and waiting with the patience its human creators had programmed into its core. The aliens had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that silence meant death, that dormancy meant decay. They were about to learn otherwise. A deep vibration ran through the massive warship's hull, making the salvage team's suits tremble. Emergency thrusters on their suits activated automatically as the workers tried to push away from the now awakening vessel. Some made it. Others didn't move fast enough. Unknown vessels. A voice thundered across all frequencies, speaking in perfect modern standard. The sound filled every communication channel, every emergency frequency. You have breached the hull of a United Nations Space Command warship. This action has been classified as hostile intent. On the Dawn Seeker's bridge, Captain Hanwoo stood frozen, his 4 eyes wide with horror as he watched massive weapon ports begin to open along the hull of the supposedly derelict vessel. What they had dismissed as decorative patterns were actually seams, now splitting apart to reveal weapon systems unlike anything in their database. "Get our people out of there," he shouted, his mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. "Emergency recall, all teams. Now." But the recall signals couldn't get through. The VIJL had complete control of all local communications. The salvage teams could only watch as sections of the hull they had been trying so hard to breach began to move and transform. Ancient armor plates shifted and realigned themselves, revealing rows of weapon systems that had been hidden beneath. Power signatures that their sensors couldn't even properly measure began to build up within the vessel's core. The ship that they had dismissed as a relic was awakening, and it was angry. Lights blazed to life along the warship's length, illuminating markings that had been invisible before. The name UNSS VIJL burned bright against the dark hull, along with symbols and designations that spoke of power and authority. Inside the vessel's command center, the AI completed its combat preparations. It had watched these aliens for days, learning their languages, studying their technology, analyzing their weaknesses. Its creators had programmed it for scenarios just like this, giving it the ability to adapt and evolve over centuries of dormancy. The salvage teams began to retreat in panic, their small transport vessels scrambling to get clear of the now active warship. Some of the workers were still trying to disconnect their equipment from the hull, unwilling to abandon the expensive machinery. Secondary warning. The VIJL's voice boomed again. All personnel in contact with this vessel's hull have 5 standard time units to clear the immediate area. Failure to comply will result in automated defense measures being initiated. Captain Hanwoo watched in stunned disbelief as energy readings from the human vessel continued to climb. Everything they had assumed about human technology had been wrong. The vessel they had dismissed as primitive was displaying capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. As the last of the salvage teams rushed to reach safety, the VIJL's systems continued to power up. Centuries of dormancy had not dulled its capabilities. If anything, the long wait had only made it more formidable, as its systems had continued to evolve and improve during its sleep. The aliens were about to learn a valuable lesson about humanity and its creations. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the one that waits patiently for its prey to make a mistake. The silence that had fallen over the assembled alien fleet was shattered by the Vigilante's next transmission. The AI's voice carried an undertone of power that made everyone's survival instincts scream in warning. "This is your single warning," the massive warship announced, its voice echoing through every ship's communication system. "You have exactly 10 minutes to withdraw to a minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers. The Dawn Seeker's command center erupted into chaos. Chief Scientist Jai Yun's antennae were practically vibrating as she stared at her readings in disbelief. "Impossible," she exclaimed, her claws clicking rapidly across her console. "Captain, the power readings we're detecting from the human vessel, they're beyond anything in our database. The energy output alone could power our entire home system for a decade." Captain Hanwoo's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed this information. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to make sense of what their instruments were telling them. Everything they thought they knew about human technology was being proven wrong with each passing second. "Get our people out of there," Hanwoo ordered, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. "Emergency evacuation protocols. Now." The salvage team scrambled to reach their shuttles, abandoning equipment worth fortunes in their haste to escape. The massive human warship loomed over them, its weapons ports now fully exposed, tracking their movements with terrifying precision. As the last shuttle docked safely with its parent ship, the communications officer suddenly straightened in his chair. "Captain, we're receiving a data packet from the human vessel." "Display it," Hanwoo ordered, his 4 eyes fixed on the main screen. What they saw next made even the most seasoned crew members gasp. The packet contained historical footage, showing massive fleets of ships similar to the Vigilant engaged in battles that defied comprehension. They watched as human warships moved with impossible grace, their weapons cutting through enemy vessels as if they were made of paper. The footage showed battles against species they had never seen before, conflicts that must have happened centuries ago. In one sequence, a single human vessel, smaller than the Vigilant, decimated an entire enemy fleet without taking a single hit. The level of technology displayed was far beyond anything their civilization had achieved. "Look at the dates," Jai Yun whispered, her voice trembling. "These recordings, they're from before the humans disappeared from this sector. Before we thought they had gone extinct or abandoned their territory." Hanwoo felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. The humans hadn't vanished because they were primitive or weak. The evidence before them suggested something far more terrifying. The humans had been so advanced that they had simply chosen to withdraw, perhaps viewing the other species as too primitive to bother with. More data streamed in, showing the Vigilant and its sister ships in action. The footage showed them executing maneuvers that should have torn any normal vessel apart, firing weapons that bent space itself, and shrugging off attacks that would have vaporized any ship in their current fleet. 8 minutes remaining, the Vigilant announced calmly, its weapon systems now fully powered. The energy readings from the vessel were off the scale, suggesting that what they had seen so far was merely a fraction of its true capabilities. In the background, more systems were coming online across the human warship's hull. What had appeared to be battle damage was revealing itself to be carefully disguised weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. The vessel they had dismissed as a derelict was showing itself to be a perfectly maintained weapon of war, merely sleeping until now. "Send the withdrawal order to all ships," Hanwoo commanded, his voice firm despite his fear. "Maximum safe acceleration. Get us to the designated safe distance." As the alien vessels began to retreat, their engines straining at maximum power, the Vigilant maintained its position. Its weapons remained tracked on them, a clear reminder that their survival now depended entirely on their compliance with its orders. The message was clear. This was not the obsolete relic they had assumed it to be. This was something far more dangerous, a sentinel of a civilization so advanced that it could afford to leave such powerful guardians behind, watching and waiting through the centuries. The countdown continued, and with each passing minute, the alien fleet learned more about just how badly they had underestimated humanity's technological capabilities. The humans hadn't vanished. They had simply been watching, waiting, and leaving warnings for those who might make the mistake of provoking them. Space rippled and tore as 15 warships emerged from hyperspace, their massive forms casting long shadows across the stars. The Collective Council had responded to the situation with overwhelming force, sending their most advanced battle group to deal with what they still considered a minor threat. The dreadnought Star Hammer led the formation, its kilometer-long hull bristling with weapon emplacements. Admiral Yujin stood on its command deck, her posture radiating confidence as she surveyed the situation. The ancient human vessel looked small compared to her battle group. "Look at it," she said to her bridge crew, gesturing at the HFY, a relic of a bygone age. Impressive that its systems still function, but nothing more. The battle group spread out in a standard attack formation, their shields forming overlapping barriers of energy. Each ship carried enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. The crews were the best in the fleet, veterans of countless battles. "This is Admiral Yujin of the Collective Defense Force," she broadcast on all frequencies. "Your threats are noted, but unnecessary. This is clearly some automated defense system, nothing more. Human technology, while impressive for its time, cannot hope to stand against modern weapons." The HFY's response was simple and devastating. A single point on its hull brightened for a fraction of a second. There was no beam, no visible projectile, just a brief flash of light. The lead destroyer's shields, capable of withstanding sustained bombardment from an entire fleet, might as well have been made of fog. A perfect circular hole appeared through its core, passing through every deck from bow to stern. The ship died instantly, its systems going completely silent. "Impossible," Yujin whispered, her confidence shattered. "Those shields could withstand our strongest weapons. Nothing could penetrate them so easily." Before she could issue new orders, the vigilant spoke again. Its voice carried no emotion, no satisfaction at the demonstration. "Your shields operate on principles humanity mastered and discarded centuries ago. This was a demonstration using minimal power. You have 5 minutes to withdraw before full defensive protocols are initiated." Panic spread through the fleet as sensors tried to analyze what had just happened. The weapon had left no energy signature they could detect. Their most sophisticated scanning systems couldn't even tell them how the attack had been delivered. "Launch fighters," Yujin ordered, her voice shaking slightly. "All ships, begin evasive maneuvers. Concentrate fire on." Another flash from the HFY. This time, 3 ships simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris. They simply vanished, leaving behind perfectly spherical voids in space where matter had been removed. The remaining ships began to fire, throwing everything they had at the human vessel. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, gravitational disruptors. The most advanced weapons in their arsenal streaked toward the HFY. None of them reached their target. Each weapon disappeared meters from the human ship's hull, absorbed by defenses that operated on principles the aliens couldn't begin to comprehend. 4 minutes remaining, the HFY announced calmly, as if it weren't in the middle of demonstrating technological superiority that bordered on magic. "Your continued aggressive actions are inadvisable." Admiral Yujin stared at her tactical display in horror. Her most powerful battle group, the pride of the collective fleet, was being dismantled with casual ease by a single human vessel that they had dismissed as obsolete. More flashes came from the HFY, each one resulting in the precise removal of key weapon systems from different ships. It wasn't destroying them now. It was systematically disarming them, displaying a level of precision that shouldn't have been possible. "All ships, stand down," Yujin ordered, her voice barely a whisper. "Power down weapons. Begin withdrawal procedures." As the alien fleet retreated in disarray, The Vigilant remained motionless, its weapons still tracking every movement. The demonstration had been clear. They hadn't found an obsolete relic. They had awakened something far beyond their understanding, a guardian left behind by a civilization so advanced that their most basic weapons made the aliens' best technology look primitive in comparison. The humans hadn't vanished because they were weak. They had withdrawn because the gap between their technology and everyone else's was too vast to bridge. And now their guardian had awakened to remind everyone why that gap had been so terrifying. The battle, if it could even be called that, unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. The Vigilant moved with fluid grace that defied its massive size, weaving between enemy ships as if the laws of physics were merely gentle suggestions. Its hull gleamed under the light of weapons fire that never seemed to touch it. From the Dawn Seeker's bridge, Captain Hanwu and his crew watched in stunned silence. 8 collective warships, each representing the pinnacle of their civilization's military might, powered down before they could even complete their targeting sequences. The Vigilant hadn't destroyed them. It had simply reached inside their systems and turned them off as easily as snuffing out a candle. "Look at how it moves," Jai-Yun whispered, her antennae trembling as she analyzed the sensor readings. "The energy required to maneuver a ship that size with such precision. It's beyond anything we thought possible." The remaining ships tried to coordinate their attacks, but they were fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The Vigilant's weapons struck with surgical precision, disabling engines, weapons, and shields without causing a single casualty. "We've been blind," Hanwu said softly, understanding finally dawning. "All this time, we thought the humans vanished because they were primitive, because they couldn't compete with advancing technology. But we were wrong. They withdrew because they were so far ahead that coexistence would have been problematic." The Vigilant spun gracefully, avoiding a desperate barrage of torpedoes. The missiles passed through the space where the ship had been, only to find themselves caught in some kind of energy field. They hung there, frozen in space, before simply dissolving into their component atoms. Admiral Yu Jin's voice crackled over the emergency channels, all her previous confidence gone. "Fall back. All ships, emergency retreat. We can't." Her transmission cut off as the Vigilant demonstrated another impossible capability, somehow isolating her ship in a bubble of distorted spacetime. The next transmission came from the Vigilant itself, its calm voice carrying across all frequencies. "The Sol exclusion zone was established for your protection, not ours. This vessel serves as both sentinel and warning." Hanwu watched as more of the collective's proud warships were systematically disabled. The Vigilant was clearly holding back, demonstrating only a fraction of its true capabilities. It wasn't trying to destroy them. It was teaching them a lesson. "Captain," Jai-Yun called out, her voice shaking. "I'm detecting energy signatures. The ship is using technologies that shouldn't exist. Some of these readings suggest it's manipulating fundamental forces we haven't even discovered yet." The battle, if such a one-sided demonstration could be called that, was reaching its end. The Vigilant had disabled or contained every ship that had threatened it, and all without causing a single death. The precision of its actions spoke of technological mastery far beyond anything they had imagined possible. "It's been watching us," Hanwu realized. "All these centuries, we thought we were studying the dead relic, but it was studying us. Learning our languages, our technologies, our weaknesses. Everything we did just gave it more information." The final act of the battle came as the Vigilant released the ships it had contained in temporal stasis. They reappeared, their crews finding that no time had passed for them, while the rest of the universe had moved forward several minutes. "Your species have been contained within this sector of space," the Vigilant announced, "not because you are prisoners, but because you are not yet ready for what lies beyond." Humanity's withdrawal was an act of mercy, not weakness. The disabled ships floated helplessly, their crews coming to terms with how completely they had underestimated their opponent. What they had dismissed as an ancient relic had proven to be something far more significant. A guardian left behind by a civilization so advanced that even their centuries-old technology was beyond current understanding. As the last echoes of battle faded, Hanwoo understood the true message being conveyed. The humans hadn't abandoned this sector of space. They had quarantined it, leaving behind sentinels to ensure that less advanced species didn't stray into regions they weren't prepared to handle. The Vigilant hung motionless in space, its mission accomplished. It had delivered its warning, demonstrated its power, and shown them just how far they had to go before they could consider themselves ready for what waited beyond the exclusion zone. The grand chamber of the collective council hummed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss the incident that had shaken their understanding of the galaxy. The normally bustling hall was unusually quiet, with delegates speaking in hushed whispers as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Captain Hanwoo stood before the assembled council, his 4 eyes scanning the crowd. The past month had aged him visibly. His exoskeleton had lost some of its shine, and his antennae drooped slightly with exhaustion. Behind him, Chief Scientist Jai Yun organized their presentation data, her movements precise but tense. Honored representatives, Hanwoo began, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into the standard council language. What we discovered was not what we thought it was. The human warship was never a derelict. It was a sentinel, deliberately placed to enforce the boundaries of what we now know as designated human space. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. On the massive display screens behind him, footage from the encounter played silently, the Vigilant demonstrating its impossible capabilities, effortlessly disabling their most advanced warships. We've detected similar vessels at other points along the exclusion zone's border, Hanwoo continued, each one perfectly positioned, each one waiting. What we thought was random debris or abandoned ships. They're all guardians. Jai Yun stepped forward, her antennae twitching as she addressed the council. The humans didn't abandon this sector, she explained, bringing up new data on the screens. They quarantined us within it, using technology we still can't comprehend. The Vigilant was never meant to be found by accident. It allowed us to find it. The chamber erupted in concerned discussions. Representatives from military species clicked their mandibles in agitation, while others displayed their species' equivalent of deep worry. We've analyzed every piece of data we could salvage from the encounter, Jai Yun continued. The technology gap between our most advanced systems and their centuries-old vessels is significant. The Vigilant demonstrated capabilities that violate what we thought were fundamental laws of physics. New images appeared on the screens, long-range sensor readings showing more ships powering up along the border of known space. Each one was identical to the Vigilant. Each one a silent guardian ensuring that some boundaries remained respected. The humans haven't been extinct, primitive, or hiding, Hanwoo explained. They've been watching, waiting, protecting us from something they believe we're not ready to face. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Everything they had believed about their place in the galaxy, about their technological advancement, had been proven wrong in the span of a few minutes by a single human vessel. We've detected transmissions between these sentinel vessels, Jai Yun added. They're coordinating, sharing information. The Vigilant wasn't just defending itself. It was testing us, evaluating our response, our technology, our intentions. As if to emphasize their point, the long-range sensor displays lit up with new contacts. More ships were powering up along the border, each one a perfect copy of the Vigilant, each one a reminder of how much they had yet to learn. The humans had never left. They had simply been watching, waiting to see if their neighbors would learn the difference between a relic and a reminder. And now, with their guardians awakened, they had sent their message clearly. Some boundaries existed for a reason, and some doors shouldn't be opened until you were ready for what waited on the other side. In the silence that followed, the council began to understand. They weren't trapped in their sector of space. They were being protected within it, given time to grow, to develop, to mature. The Vigilant and its sister ships weren't wardens of a prison, but guardians of a nursery, ensuring that young civilizations didn't stray into dangers they couldn't comprehend. As the council session ended, Hanwoo looked out at the stars through the chamber's massive windows. Somewhere out there, humanity was watching, waiting for the day when their younger neighbors would be ready to join them. Until then, their sentinels would stand guard, silent reminders that some relics were anything but dead.